Today's episode is brought to you by Media for All, which was set up to help encourage more Black, Asian, and other ethnic talent into media, and to provide a support and mentoring network to ensure talent flourishes in the media industry that we all love. If you're looking for a mentor or would like to mentor young ethnic talent, check them out at mediaforall.org.uk, and it is all 100% free.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing some of our industry's leaders, and this week is no different. I'm on the phone to Talia Gerecitano, who is head of marketing at Mailchimp Presents. So, Talia, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm really grateful you've given up the time. Could you give the audience a little bit of an overview about who you are and what you do?
Oh, sure. Hello. Thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm Talia. I've been in marketing for about 18 years. I guess that's aging me, but I'll take it. And primarily I've been in the content industry. So which wasn't called that, I guess. When I started, I was in the TV industry and then moved into movies, and now I'm in more content. But I've sort of gone from traditional television to more of the tech space now that the streamers have come into the world, and even sort of further with now I'm at Mailchimp Presents, which is Mailchimp's streaming service, and working on content for that streaming service, which has been a really exciting change. But yeah, I studied marketing in school. I went into marketing when I got out of school, and I've been in it ever since.
So we always have a couple of getting to know you questions at the start of this podcast.
Yeah.
So what is the new belief or behavior that you've taken on in the last 5 years or so that's had the biggest impact on your work?
Oh, well, gosh, and even more so in the last 5 months, I'd say. But learning how to say no, I think has been a huge change in my work life and my work-life balance and just doing my job better. I mean, I think that's not to say I just started saying no to everything, but I think there are times when we're in the heat of launching something or in a campaign or even just in the midst of some life stress where we just feel like we have to get that last thing done or we have to get to that meeting because we don't want anyone's time to be wasted or whatever. And we sort of forget that our own time is really valuable and our own well-being is really valuable. And so sometimes we just need to say no and the world's not going to end. I mean, we actually had a situation like that last week where we were scheduled to do this last week, but I forgot that someone was coming to our house and was going to be making a lot of noise. And so I was worried about wasting your time, but I also didn't wanted the podcast to be better than that. So I said, we should move it. And I don't think the world ended. Here we are. But I think just that perspective of really valuing your own time and understanding your worth in the world and in business and being able to say no when it's appropriate and meaningful is important and has really changed the way that I work.
So there's always a chasm between what makes total sense in a short sentence like that or in a chapter in a book or in a tweet. So say no and to only do the important things. No one is going to argue with that, but the practice of it is almost impossible. So how do you get better at saying no? How does someone who's rubbish at saying no become a better knower?
I don't know that there's any one thing that I could point to. I think it has to do with the confidence of being a little bit further. For me, it's been the confidence of being a little bit further in my career. And just having seen other people do it and being like, that person just said no to me and I feel okay about it and I understand where they're coming from. So maybe I can do the same thing. So I think it's just, evaluating those circumstances and giving yourself time to stop and be like, does this make sense? Am I saying no in the right way? And is it really benefiting me? And is it not hurting the other person? And just kind of evaluating those situations more. But I really do think it has a lot to do with just experience and confidence and how that grows over time.
And is there anything that you've regretted saying no to since you've been much more of a proficient no person?
I don't think so. I think I'm pretty thoughtful about the things that I say no to. and the things that I say yes to. So I know I don't have any regrets on that front.
Yeah, I think I've heard it said that you regret things that you say yes to a lot more than things you say no to, because they sort of tend to just evaporate at that point, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
So other than saying no, what advice would you give to a young student who's entering the industry, assuming they're motivated and smart and doing all the right things? What is the advice that you would give to the best students coming into the industry to get ahead?
I think that I would first tell them just to, I mean, the biggest like overarching piece of advice that I have is just to decide what kind of marketer you are. I think for me, there's two big types. I mean, obviously there's a lot of different types of marketers, but for me, there's like the people that love marketing, and the people that love a product. So if you just love marketing and you love the tactics and you love the idea of selling something and you love the idea of framing it and the creative and the business and how the business is evolving, I think you could market anything and you'd be happy. But there's also the other type, which is more me, which was I just loved entertainment. I loved one thing and I loved talking about it anyway. And so for me, like marketing, being able to market entertainment, was just seemed sort of like a dream come true and has been. But I think if you can figure out which side of that spectrum you're on and then go, if you decide you really love marketing, then find the best marketing firms, do research and find the marketing that you think is the most impactful, and then go and try to work for those people, or take those tactics and build up marketing at another new company or something like that. But if you love a thing, if you're like a huge sports fanatic, but you're not Tom Brady, then go work for a company that markets sports, where you can like really be invested and passionate about the thing that you're passionate about and infuse that into the marketing that you're doing. I just feel like it can be really cumbersome because I would say almost every company in the world has marketing. And so if you're just saying, I want to get into marketing, like being able to narrow that down and think about what it is that you're really wanting to do, will help you kind of get that foot in the door and just narrow your search and your dreams of becoming a great marketer.
And what about the current situation? Because we're sort of hopefully coming out of the end of COVID-19, obviously more or less in different places, but what extra advice would you give to a student who's graduating now, who's going to be under massive competition, even more than they would have been this time last year?
Oh gosh, I don't know, Tom. I would say stay in college if you can. No, I don't know. I mean, I would say don't, one of the things that I've learned working at Mailchimp is that regardless of what's going on in the world, and sometimes even because of it, you're always going to want to market your business. So marketing in itself is not going away, and layoffs and sort of hiring practices aside, marketing is really valuable in this time for keeping especially small businesses alive, and that desire to share what your business is and talk about what your business is really thriving. And so I think if you want to get into marketing right now, then try to understand that point of view and try to understand what people are going through and the different ways that they need to market, and understand that the billboard on Sunset isn't really getting you much right now, but the new digital ad or the new way of marketing, it's all going to change. And so sort of embedding yourself into that and trying to understand how that evolution can happen, I think is super important.
And so finally, before we move on to your shiny new object, how do you want people to remember your career, given that you've come all the way through from graduating to work for all of these exciting businesses? What is the bit you want people to remember, or how do you want people to remember you specifically?
Well, I don't know. Hopefully they're not remembering me anytime soon, but if I would say my career, I hope that people, and the way that I see it is sort of like the evolution of the career, which has mirrored the evolution of the business, really. When I was in entertainment, when I started in entertainment, it was very traditional. It was like you got in cable, or if you wanted to do movies, you went to the studios. And enter streaming services, and 10 years later it's just completely different. And I feel like I hope I've done a good job of sort of evolving with that. And in the moves from the more traditional cable world to the streaming world, and now even to more of just the short form content for brands world. I feel like that's the way that the business has gone, and that's the way that my career has followed it. And so I'm really proud of that. And I hope that that's the takeaway that people have when they see, when they think about my career, if they are thinking about it at all.
So how deliberate have your career choices been? So you painted a really interesting picture there with the changing role of entertainment and the rise of the streaming services, and we'll get onto your role in that in a moment. But have you always thought, right, well, where's the industry going to leap to in 5 years' time, and I'm going to go there before everyone else? Or have you just kind of gone with the tide? Like, how have you plotted your career at this point, or has it just been completely random?
I'd say it's somewhere in between. It wasn't plotted out. It wasn't completely random. I think I saw the opportunities come up and I took them because I was excited that there were new opportunities. I mean, there was like a very strict, direct career path if you got into cable, and that, you just sort of rose up the ranks. And if you could get to the best cable, then great. But if not, you were that was the way that you would go. And there was really one industry and one sort of set of companies. And then all of a sudden tech came into the world, and that just opened up a whole new idea of the type of company you could work for and the culture of company that you could work for, while still working on entertainment. And so I think those opportunities came up for me, luckily enough, but I definitely did follow them and sort of go with that evolution and try to just try new things and go where the industry was going.
If you love all things innovation and want to understand how brands plan to emerge stronger from the current situation, don't forget to check out Madfest London on the 11th and 12th of November. My good friend Dan at Madfest knows how to put on a cracking event, and there's always plenty of amazing speakers, beer and cool people to meet. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we're going to move on now to your shiny new object, which is original content as marketing. Mm-hmm. And just as note, when we chatted the other day, as we always do to prep for these podcasts, you were telling me about Mailchimp Presents, and I didn't know a great deal about Mailchimp Presents. So it'd be really useful for you to talk to the audience about what specifically it is, the kind of things that you guys create, and what's the mission with the streaming service.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, this is one of those opportunities that came up when I was living in Los Angeles and was wanting to move back home to Atlanta, and my a friend recommended Mailchimp, and I thought, this makes no sense with my career path because I work on content and entertainment. But the company has such an amazing reputation, and the culture is renowned, and it's creative and lovely. And then so it was worth looking into for me. And then when I did, I lucked out in that they were wanting to start a streaming service and get into the content world. And so the content that we're producing at Mailchimp Presents is all about the spirit and sort of the emotional side of being an entrepreneur. So, I mean, you know this as well as anyone, starting your own business is exciting, but also risky and scary. And it comes with a lot of ups and downs. And those same feelings and those same emotions can be applied to a lot of different situations in life and a lot of different career paths and a lot of just different things in the world. And so we've sort of started to collect a series of stories, whether it's short films or original series or podcasts, that all embody this kind of emotional journey and entrepreneurial spirit. And so, I mean, that's anything from something like that's very directly business makeover show to a podcast about musicians who are talking about their sort of rise to fame. And that is like, has such clear parallels of like really trying something new and putting yourself out there and risking everything. And so, we're making sure that we connect those dots for consumers, but it's really, I'm so sorry. My dog is like.
No, it's all part of the fun. Don't invite your dog in, and I'll ask you questions.
So anyway, that's the content that we're producing. That's the content that we're producing at Mailchimp Presents. But it is all sort of about that that spirit and that emotional journey. So and they did that because they thought, Mailchimp, and this was all decided and concocted before I got there, which was amazing. But just in that, I think you can connect with people in a different way when you're using content versus an ad, which is also really valuable, but it's just a different connection and sort of a different relationship to the consumer.
So out of all the content that Presents has done, what are your favorite shows? For someone who hasn't come across that, where's a good place to start?
Sorry, what was that?
So
you broke up for a second, I'm sorry.
So for someone who's new to Mailchimp Presents, what's a good place to start? What are the kind of killer shows or episodes that you think
gosh. I would say, our podcasts are really wonderful. So we have the podcast I was mentioning called The Jump, that Shirley Manson hosts from Garbage, and just talking to different musicians about their stories and sort of their career paths. And then we have a podcast called Going Through It, which features all women, and this season actually features all Black women, which is super interesting, just talking about a moment in their life where they decided whether to quit or to keep going. Which again, not on all of those stories, not directly related to business, but I think that idea is really related to business and entrepreneurship. And then we have one called Call Paul, which is with Paul Jarvis, and he's talking to, this one's a little bit more on the news, where it's talking to small business owners, and particularly in the time of COVID, like what challenges they faced and how they've tried to overcome it, and sort of what they're thinking about for the future. So all of those podcasts, I think, are just really amazing stories that people can relate to on many different levels.
So what's your process for deciding what content to make? Are you looking for like search trends, or do you just spot obvious places and gaps in the market, or do you look at someone else's podcast and think, well, we could do it better than that, or we've got access to this talent? Like what's your process for coming up with ideas before you even do it?
We have a team who does all of that, who decides what content we make. But I can give a little bit of insight, which is just more of, I think, looking at the history of our brand and what people have responded to in the past, and what stories that we're seeing them share, and the feelings that they've shared with us, and sort of taking those ideas and turning them into content, or thinking, kind of applying that to content that's pitched to us, and but always keeping that thread going through it of trying to connect with them on that emotional level.
And so who do you look up to in this space, in the original content as marketing space, as it were? Who do you think absolutely nails this, apart from yourselves?
Well, I think it's new. Airbnb is starting to do it. I'm not sure if they haven't really gotten that far into it, but Tinder's starting to do it. Refinery 29 was getting into the movie business. There's all different kinds of companies that are just getting off the ground. One that we always really look to is WeTransfer and their platform WePresents, which we think it's beautifully laid out, and the content is wonderful. And but it is so new, so I think it's really anyone's game right now. But I think we look up to those brands and the fact that they are also doing this, and that they understand the value of doing it. And so we'll definitely be keeping an eye on people to see how they evolve and what their content is. And it's interesting, there's like a quite a big spectrum of people that are making content for marketing, but still infusing that marketing message and that brand message, and saying, like, we still want you to buy this thing, but here's this content, or and infusing it a little bit more organically as they're going through the content. Whereas we're really on the other side of the spectrum. You'll see a Mailchimp original series and a logo up front, but you really won't hear about it for the rest of the show. That's not the intention. And the intention is really just to give you stories to digest. Of course, the hope is then that you think well of Mailchimp and you love the Mailchimp brand, and then you want to go to Mailchimp, and then you want to sign up and all of that. But that's, we've set ourselves up so that we're okay with the fact that journey may not always lead right now to somebody signing up for $9.99. But it's more about just connecting the dots and having people feel related to our brand and feel like our brand is really friendly and welcoming and understands what they're going through.
So how do you measure the success of it in that case?
That's a great question. For us, I think, we measure brand. We have brand studies that we do, and we're looking for people to think of us as inspiring and creative. And of course, there's those more hard metrics like view numbers and things like that. But I think mostly what we look for is sentiment, or, even if there's a handful of people who are going like, this really makes sense, and this really spoke to me, and I felt better after watching it, or I felt like they understood me and I was less alone. That's success for us. So I'm sure down the line, we're going to want to put a little bit harder of a metric around it. But for right now, I think the fact that people are responsive to it and are willing to go on this journey with us, that's a huge success for us.
And so it's interesting just to jump back 1 second to talk about Tinder, Airbnb, and WeTransfer. I'm sort of familiar with what Airbnb do, but I really didn't realize that Tinder did everything. And I'm glad, because I'm married with a child, so it would be odd if I came across any of that.
You're not spending a ton of time on Tinder.
But it's interesting the size of those businesses. They're big, but they're not like so big. And it's what we're trying to get to, that these are kind of disruptive businesses that have disrupted a category to a degree. I think that's what unites them and yourselves. And all of these businesses going into the content game, does that mean that it's going to be an expectation from the consumer? Do you think that at some point is our toothpaste brand going to need to be producing original content outside of its own advertising, or is it suited to a certain kind of business?
Well, I think it depends on the brand. I mean, if the toothpaste company comes up with a really great strategy, then good for them. But I think right now, and like I was saying about sort of measuring our success, when we said that we were going to do this, nobody was like, what? Mailchimp's making content? Because we've established ourselves, and those other brands, I think in different ways, have established themselves as creative people, and like you said, sort of groundbreaking and rule breaking. And so it makes sense. And even when we're talking to content partners and advertising partners and things, we have a strategy around it. We're saying that all of our content has to have this thread going through it of this entrepreneur journey and emotion. So I think I've said journey 20 times, but if we didn't have that, if we're not coming out saying like, oh, we're going to produce the next Marvel movie, I mean, that would not make sense. So I think as long as brands kind of understand where their lane is and what their core being is and what their just sort of typical brand strategy is, and then can develop content that falls in line with that, then really anyone could do it on some level. I think right now the people that are doing it are the ones who have already gone down paths similar to this in the past, and this is just sort of that next step. So it'll be interesting to see who jumps into the game as we're going along. But I think, and I'm sure we'll see some of those people who try it and make something that just completely doesn't make sense with their brand and it doesn't work, and they'll toe dip and that'll be it. But I think there are a lot more out there who could start doing this, and because they've established themselves as creatives, it could definitely work, and it's a new avenue. And again, like what we were saying to the students earlier, I think it's going to be even more prominent now with COVID and everything that's going on, because people are just going to be looking for new ways to get their message out and to get their stories out.
So how would you advise small businesses to do this, or people who don't have the budget to put together a show or a podcast, other than original content, writing a blog or making your Instagram feed kind of interesting? But this is like a whole nother level up. This, I think, requires time and budget and energy and real craft of content. So how would someone who's listening to this thinking, oh yeah, we should really do that, what are the steps that person should take to decide what is the right thing to do?
Yeah. So and like I said, it's not going to work for everyone, but I think if you are confident that your brand has that, or your company could benefit from that, I would really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve with the content and what the story is that you want to tell, and identify those key criteria that you have to apply to everything that you're doing. And then I think it's kind of open. Yeah, some of our stuff is very highly produced and expensive, and some of our stuff is not. I mean, I think podcasts are a really interesting space to be in right now because people want to hear more stories, and people want to turn off their Zoom and listen to something. And so you can have a podcast on a very low budget, and that is something that could work for a lot of different people, and just like telling the stories of their customers or who they're trying to reach, or even of themselves and their own business. So I think, it doesn't have to be content that is super slick produced, but it just has to really stay true to who your company is and what you're trying to communicate to your consumers. And I think there's many different ways that you could do that in many different budget levels and styles. It's just finding the one that's right for you.
So unfortunately, we've come to the end of the podcast. If someone wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Oh, I mean, anyway, LinkedIn, email. I'm always happy to talk to people about this.
And what makes a good outreach to you?
I would say come with some context. What do you want to talk about? Why do you specifically want to talk to me? What are you hoping to get out of our conversation? But also, if you want to say hello and just say, I just wanted to connect, that's fine too. But I think the ones that I feel most passionate about responding to and excited to respond to are when there's, a question to be answered or a problem to be solved that's really in my wheelhouse. I get a lot of people sometimes coming with something that doesn't have anything to do with me because I'm in tech and they think I know things about engineering, and I definitely do not. So I think just making sure it's something that I can actually talk about is helpful.
Well, look, that is great advice for reaching out to you. And thanks for showing us behind the scenes at Mailchimp Presents and for sharing your insight and how you say no to things and how people can get into the industry. I really appreciate your time, Talia. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, Tom. This was great. I'm always happy to talk about this.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the shiny new Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.